just want to make sure that we've got all our technical glitches out of the way. So we've got Lauren up next. For those of you that, again, don't or may not know Lauren, Lauren Thorpe is the Director of Strategy at ARC Schools. I'll leave her to introduce herself and just want to make sure from our team that all is technically running okay. There we go. Perfect timing, Lauren. Good morning and welcome. I know that you're massively busy, so we're, as I know, that's not to say that Dave and Derek are not either, but I know you're massively busy, so really grateful for you giving up your time this morning. So, Lauren, I'll hand over to you and let you introduce yourself. But thank you very much.
Here you go, Lauren. As soon as I stop sharing, then you can share yours, okay?
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. And I just caught the end of David's presentation there, and I'm always really impressed to see what other multi-academy trusts are doing with their data. It's we are always all learning, and I think that that's one of the really great opportunities today is to be part of those conversations. So I'm really excited about that. So I think hopefully what I'm going to say today is going to be a little bit different and helpful. I've just got to make sure, I think I've got to minimize this, but can everybody see my screen okay? Yes or no? Is this working? Great. Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is how we have used our data to drive some of the decision making, but also some of the processes that we use across our schools as well, because I think that we've been on quite a long journey now in the use of data across ARC. I think we were sort of an early adopter in that aggregation of data across schools, and I think that what I was quite interested in doing was sharing where we are on that journey, some of the reflections that we've had over the last few years as we've used our data, and hopefully to provide some food for thought for others that are working through these decisions themselves as well. So I'm going to start. I'll keep an eye on the chat if I can. But mindful, I don't think I can quite see that on the screen without toggling. So apologies for that. So firstly, I think the early days of our use of data, we really focused on three things that would enable us to be able to make our sort of strategic decisions that supports the way that our schools work, and to support us in driving improvement in attainment across our schools. And they were consistency, scale, and technology. Now, I think that having common definitions and using common assessments, which I'll talk to a little bit more, and having common approaches to as many things as possible is absolutely key. The ability that we had then to be able to apply sort of central administration to as many things as possible has been really powerful. And I think that our absolute principle is, and we say this a lot internally, we want to have a single source of the truth. We want the ability to enter data in one place once and use it many times across our ecosystem. And that we believe that having that sort of single data warehouse with integrated data, integrating multiple data sources is absolutely crucial for us, and I think that we are taking a slightly different approach to Dret and Harris that you've already heard about. But I think that ultimately, I think we're all trying to achieve the same things, but perhaps we've got about it a slightly different way, partly because some of the tools and some of the functionality that is being used now across multi-academy trust was not available when we sort of built a lot of our infrastructure. It's amazing to see what Bromcom have been doing with Power BI recently. So exciting times ahead. But in terms of this sort of strategic approach to using data to make decisions, I've just set out here some of the things that we've consistently talked about as a multi-academy trust around what's important and what we need for a MAT strategic approach to data. And I think that firstly, I've sort of highlighted the ones there that I want to talk about, is that we actually have a data warehouse that sits outside the sort of MIS infrastructure that we use to blend essentially data across multiple different sources. So we're able to pull in data across all of the different instances of the MIS that we have, and which is helpful when we've got schools, you know, that are perhaps transitioning into the MAT as well. And we're able to pull in data from a range of additional data sources as well, not all of which actually is cleansed or structured in a way that enables it to sit neatly and nicely alongside all of the other data. But we use some cloud-based data cleansing workflow tools. We use a tool called Alteryx that helps us to cleanse data sort of dynamically and on the fly to be able to blend it with other data sources. So that's really important for us. The next thing that was really important, and increasingly this is more prevalent, is that having consistency in your approach to assessment at scale. So because we do the same tests across all of our schools at each of our key assessment points, we're able to really understand the differences across our schools in the sort of use of different curriculum resources, and able to provide more coordinated support, I guess, to each of our schools across different curriculum areas based on topic strengths and weaknesses, etc., as well as just seeing the overall performance of schools at sort of threshold attainment measures, etc. And that's been really powerful for us. It's driven a lot of our work around curriculum. It's enabled us to look at some of the curriculum programs that we run and improve and develop certain areas of that. And to that's been something that's incredibly powerful for us. The next thing that is sort of fundamental to this strategic approach has been for us to try and automate as much business logic as possible. To that point around having a single source of the truth, and that following on that notion that enter once, used many times. There are very few actually data collection points, so we collect as little as we can and reuse that and auto calculate different things and process things on behalf of schools, so that they're confident that they don't have to manipulate all of that data, and that we're confident that we've got an aligned view across all of our schools within the network. So I'm going to go back to this one, and this is where I want to spend most of my time talking to, because I think that this is the bit that I find gets neglected a little bit, and I'm strongly of the view that it doesn't really matter what you put in the data warehouse if you haven't properly understood what it was first. So we've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to make sure that actually we are comparing apples with apples. And I don't think when we were first building out a lot of this infrastructure a few years ago now, that we always had that confidence that we were comparing like with like. And so we've gone through a really important process, and I have to say, you know, a somewhat challenging process when you're operating across 38 schools, as we have in ARC, and trying to make sure that we can deliver that consistency without disrupting and really influencing in a negative way on the work that schools are already doing. But I think we weren't always comparing like with like when we were asking for data to be input into systems, and we weren't always as mindful as we ought to have been perhaps around the workload that was involved in that. And so over the last 3 years, as part of our wider sort of data, IT and digital strategy, We've really focused on trying to rationalise that so that we're much more efficient in our use and much more confident in the quality of data. And we kicked off this work actually on the back of the DFE Workload Advisory Group. And that group, which I was actually on that group, but we published a report in 2018, which if you haven't seen it, it's worth brushing it off, finding it wherever it now lives on the DFE website. And thinking about these 4 principles that were part of that work, and reflecting on the way that data is being used in your organisations. And we did some great workshops with principals to really probe some of the data that we were collecting and holding it up against each of these principles, I guess, around the use of data to make sure that they were robust and that we could actually defend the data that we were collecting and the reason why we were collecting it. So, data must have a clear purpose. You must know why you're collecting something before you collect it. Don't just collect data for data's sake, because the risk around that is you start to make poorer decisions because you make invalid inferences from the data that you are collecting. Make sure it's precise, and we will come back to that shortly. Proportionality is absolutely fundamental. So I think in terms of wanting to make sure that what you're asking of the data is proportionate to the time it takes to collect it. So I think it's really important from a teacher workload perspective that we don't ask them to spend disproportionate amount of times when we're not extracting significant value from that data later. So that really ought to be a key consideration of what's being collected and why that it's being collected. I would add to that quality. So I've sort of added my own addendum to the P's, and it's sort of derived from all of these, well, particularly around the process piece. But I'm going to talk to these 2 together and just describe a couple of things that we've done as a multi-academy trust over the last 3 years to really make sure that all of the data that we're using, we are confident in, and that we believe it is strong enough to hold up to each of these tests, and that it's strong enough for us to be able to defend the insights that we're drawing from it, and that everybody has confidence in the way that we're using that data. So firstly, on the process piece, we've built out a number of user journeys, and we ask all of our schools to think about this as part of the processes that they're developing. So a good example around this is around, say, safeguarding. So we spent a lot of time looking at what were the processes around recording different safeguarding incidents across our schools, and over time we've got to a much stronger alignment around that. So now across our network, we know and can feel confident that our schools are recording safeguarding incidents at a sort of consistent level and a consistent threshold for different types of safeguarding concerns, and that they're all following the same process, because we built in the sort of user journey mapping that enabled us to really track and understand the actual work that was happening in the school before it even got to the point that it was being recorded in a system. And I think that those sort of what I guess we would now call sort of the what to do's or the guidance have really helped us to feel confident that the data that we're looking at is the right data. But I have to say that you can't do that without really thinking about the user experience of each person in a school in capturing that data for you and using it. So I love this around the tomato ketchup example. It's one that I use often. It's, the product inside is brilliant. I don't think anyone would dispute that tomato ketchup is a great universally used sauce. But actually, the old bottle was naff. You have to tip it up, you bang it on the end, it's really hard to get out, you have to use a knife. The new experience with the plastic squeezy bottle is much better. It's quicker, you get the right amount of tomato ketchup on your plate, it comes out nice and smoothly. And we've looked at those individuals that are carrying out different data roles in our schools and thought about what is the experience that they have in entering that data. And we've done that in a number of different areas, and we've supported other teams. So, for example, we use the MIS and Bromcom for our HR data as well. You know, we've supported the HR team in thinking about this too. So what are the steps that they go through when they're onboarding a new member of staff? Have they got the right information? Is it presented in a way that's helpful? Have we given them the guidance and training to be able to support that effectively? So making sure that you've got the right tool for the job, and you've thought about it from a user-centered perspective, I think is a really important part of the work that we've been doing across ARC to improve the efficiency, effectiveness and confidence and sort of, I guess, happiness ultimately of the staff working in our schools. And so to follow on from that, really, we've made sure that on that process design piece, we've really strengthened the guidance, and we've got an entire area of our intranet where we've published workshops. We've got training courses across all of these areas that are named here, and then some. And additionally, in order to some of the things that have come out of that, of where we've needed to actually make sure we're using even more standardized coding. So perhaps we'd got gaps. So, for example, subject names are now consistent in the MIS, whereas they perhaps weren't before. We've now got more clear definitions around student destinations. We've introduced more formal job roles and categories across the network, so that when we're looking and recording HR details in the MIS, we've got greater consistency. We've done the same around first aid and safeguarding, and across finance and budgets, etc. So you know that some of the process design that we had done highlighted where perhaps there was ambiguity and perhaps there was inconsistency across schools that we've really tried hard to tighten up on over the last 3 years. It's not perfect, but we have tried to move that forward. The next thing around improving data quality has been on our approach to using consistent tools. So this is my framework that we use internally at ARC around thinking about which tools we use and when. So I'll start at the bottom around the central solution. So these are things where we use them across the entire network. There's a single instance used across the entire network. So an example of that would be our learning platform, which is a staff platform for coordinating training, etc. It's a single instance. Everybody that works across all ARC schools access via single sign on the same platform. We centrally administer that as part of our core infrastructure. Everybody uses it. We've then got things that sit within our standard core ecosystem. So the MIS is an example of this. So they've got their own instance of the MIS. There's central team data management. We have a tender process and central procurement process. Schools have to use tools that are in the standard core ecosystem. But there are a limited number of things in there that everybody has to use. Then we've got this sort of network approved. Now in network approved, it's where we're sort of saying, look, we think this is quite good. We're not sure it's the best one. There are a couple that fit in this category of, let's say, homework platforms or adaptive learning platforms. And so we're sort of indicating that we will support it. We will provide some kind of support, but the contracts are held at school levels. We haven't said that there is one specific winner in that space. And then we've got what I refer to as the Wild West, which, if you know the EdTech market in the UK, it's a very busy marketplace. There's a lot there, and it's very difficult actually to know which ones work well. And we've got sort of blacklisted subgroup within that of things that perhaps our schools have tried and that haven't been successful. And so this is an example of how that works in practice. So in case this is helpful to people, you'll see here the MIS. So Bromcom for us is at the absolute heart of this. And the whole ecosystem falls down without a high quality MIS that has got flexible APIs to enable us to connect to that. But you'll see there that we try and pull on, we use single identity management tools and APIs to enable us to have consistent data. So this single source of the truth principle enables us to say that things that are in our network approved third-party tools have an MIS integration, or we've got a way of making sure that students are consistently identified across all of those platforms, and staff as well. This is a slightly simplified version of the diagram, but hopefully it's illustrative. And where possible, and in as many places as possible, we pull that data into our ARC data warehouse. And we've then got our in-house analytics and KPI platform that enable us to sort of blend data from lots of these different sources. So this is sort of where some of these I've been a bit generous perhaps around the level of interoperability, but it's certainly where we're aspiring to be, and we do across our core assessment, safeguarding, sort of staff development, and across our core platforms that support sort of operational systems in our schools have this ecosystem fully in place. And in the network approved third-party tools section, as you can imagine, post-COVID and the vast and dramatic increase in the number of devices and platforms being used across our schools, we're very much now invested in trying to review more of the tools that are in our network approved third-party tools area and move them into the standard core school ecosystem. So, for example, we're working on maths apps at the moment, and we're working out how to bring our preferred maths apps into our standard school ecosystem, and hopefully then moving the data from those platforms into our data warehouse. And then the other thing that we've done on data quality, which I think has been really powerful, is we've actually built a data audit tool for our schools. So based on the things that we know that we need, and I think it's fair to say that to make this ecosystem work and to have interoperability of data across platforms, there are certain key bits of information that you need to make sure are in the MIS so that that data does flow, and similarly so that it can write back, which Bromcom have been really brilliant in supporting. But without this tool, it's really hard for us to pinpoint where some of the APIs break, perhaps, and where we've got sort of missing data from data sets. So we built this data audit tool for schools so that they can look across assessment, pastoral, administration areas and really identify where they might have got missing data. And that's been really transformative as well in making sure that we've got that confidence in our data quality. So just on that point, really, we've learned a few things along the way over the last 3 years as we've been really working on process. And I think I've got sort of 3 key points. One is that data is a comfort blanket, which is hard to change or take away. So where we've tried to rationalise some of our data and say, well, actually, we're not sure that this is, I'm not sure we've got a clear purpose for this anymore. We'd like to perhaps collect this data less or change the way that we do that. We've made lots of changes to our assessment model, for example. Schools find that really difficult if they've used it, even if they didn't really know or feel confident in the use of that data. Taking it away has still been challenging because they've had to rebuild systems, or even though they weren't sure of the impact of the data, they were still reluctant to not have it. So that's a really challenging thing to do. Systems can support consistency, but culture trumps systems every day of the week. So that piece around bringing your staff on a sort of journey, looking at those user journeys and the actual processes that they're undertaking in schools, and helping them to understand, helping them to self-review those processes really, and to understand where they might be able to make efficiencies or gains, or where it's more advantageous to do something in common with other schools. That takes a lot of time. And, you know, all of this iteration requires so much more change management when performed at scale. It's incredibly difficult to make some of these changes when you realise you need to make them, and it means that just everything takes a lot longer. So I think if there is anybody listening today that's in a small mat, some of the things that I've spoken about now around consistent naming, consistent processes, aligning around certain parts of assessment and pastoral systems, if you get that right first, it's so powerful and will save you lots of sort of retrospective changes in the future. And then I thought I'd just spend a couple of minutes talking about what's next. And I think I've already spoken a little bit to the fact that we are thinking about how we bring new systems and new tools, new apps and platforms into our sort of core ecosystem, and what that means for us from a data perspective. And I think that COVID has really accelerated some of these challenges and some of the thinking that we need to do around what comes next. And how we need to think about different data and how we might need to integrate that into our core infrastructure. And so we're very much on a journey. I mean, this is just something that we've started to be thinking about. So we know that the sort of big data, everybody will have read about it. We know that there's more of it. The data, firms in all sectors seeing their data footprint double once or twice each year. I think all of you and us the same are experiencing something a bit like that, particularly now we've been using things like Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom more and getting more and more data. We want to understand how to really embed all of that within the existing data sets that we have. And I think that that's going to be a real challenge. And this perhaps illustrates where we want to get to. So this is a sort of complexity diagram around how you might use advanced analytics and the sort of value that you can derive. And I've sort of illustrated here where ARC is. So we can report effectively on all of our data. We can provide analysis, and we can use it to effectively monitor the performance of our schools. And we can use it a little bit to do some forecasting. But we can't yet use it to help us to make long-term predictions and understand the consequences of some of the changes perhaps that are taking place in our schools. And we're certainly not at the point where we need to be, probably as a whole sector, around our use of machine learning in future, which is where you're able to really short circuit the work of some of our schools and save huge amounts of time by more proactively and prescriptively explaining and notifying schools of where they perhaps need to act well before it's happened, or well before something has happened, because the data is confident that there's a sort of pattern there that we can take some actionable steps based on. But I think that at the heart of all of this comes back to my key point, really, which is that without real confidence in the quality of your data, all of this sort of supply chain of data becomes really unreliable, and you can't use unreliable data to forecast, to make predictions, and to in future think about making decisions automatically based on some of that data. You really can't do that unless you've got absolute confidence in the quality of the data that you hold. And so that's where we are really thinking about how we can move up this sort of value chain of our data into the future, supported by this really core, strong data, which all sits around really, the heart of it is the data that we hold about our staff and our students, and that data sits within our MIS. So the MIS is absolutely at the heart of this work, but I think that there's a lot that can also sit around that. And that's it from me. So sort of whistle-stop tour of the work that we've done at ARC, and where we want to get to. And I'll hand back over to Sarah, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
That's great. Thanks so much for all of that, Lauren. It's amazing actually how much can be packed into half an hour. I have to say, a fantastic job, thank you. And I'll certainly never catch up in quite the same way again. Think of it as a product compared to the experience that is now a squeezy bottle. But yeah, you're absolutely right in that all of this is that I think sometimes people get wrapped up in collecting data for data's sake, and it's the using of that data that's going to make a difference, that just collecting data certainly doesn't. Again, I'll just give a couple of minutes to see if there are any other questions, but I think all of those that we've had along the way have been answered, Lauren, so thanks so much for that. But yeah, there are the comments that are coming in are just to say thank you to you, Fab, and thanks so much for the presentation. it looks like there are no specific other questions unless anybody wants to type them very quickly. So with that, we'll say thanks ever so much, and we'll leave you to your ultra busy schedule for the rest of the day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and it's been really great to listen bits of some of the other sessions today. So thanks.
No problem.